Okay, so if your head is still spinning from this morning, like 10 minutes ago, I am sorry, but I recorded that, and I'm hoping that these concepts just take a while to drill in, right? And I think hopefully you're learning that like any of this stuff, like a lot of things that you're trying to learn, it's like a tiny part like conceptual and watching tutorials, and it's a huge part getting your hands dirty, right? And once you start messing with it and banging your head against the wall about how this works, that's when it'll click. And we have a specific challenge that you'll do over the next 3 days. It's one of our more difficult challenges, but by the end of it, if you get through it, you will have such a better and clearer understanding of everything we went over this morning. How does that request response cycle work, right? But because we have some other stuff to go over, we're going to take a little bit of a detour and start talking about HTML and CSS. So if you remember this morning, I said, my browser makes a request to Amazon/shoes, and then we kind of just glossed over what happens on the back end there, and we'll get to that later. But what we ultimately discovered or talked about was that it delivers back the web page, and the web page is made of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's how the web works, right? So we get all that as a string, and the browser parses it, and then it looks like a nice web page for us, right? So let's actually, where do I want to start here? Let's do this. Over here. And let's do that real quick. Let's make, so I'm going to go to Amazon.com. So now when I press enter, so my browser by default goes to Google because it's Chrome, but really it shouldn't, if I could turn that off and have it go nowhere. And I open the browser and I'm not really doing anything on the internet yet. So type in Amazon.com and I hit enter, and all that stuff we did this morning, it took us half an hour to talk about, happens in a split second, right? And we get the page. Now, Chrome is great in that, actually Firefox does this as well. It's a good browser, but also it has a bunch of what they call development tools, dev tools. And you may or may not have peeked at these before. Maybe you came across them on accident. Maybe you've been developing for a while and you've seen them. But we'll talk about them on and off for the rest of the day. So here's my web page. And if I right-click, I get this menu. And I'm going to go down to Inspect right here. Can you see that? And if I click Inspect, that opens up my development tools, right? Now, these can be pretty intimidating when you first open them. There's a lot going on here. And there's a bunch of these tabs, and we'll eventually hit on most of them. But today, we're only going to talk about a couple, right? The first one is the one that it opens to. This is the Elements page. This is the code for this web page. This is all the HTML, right? So if you're ever curious, like, oh, I want to replicate a web page, hint, hint, that's one of your challenges, you can go and see how did they build this web page, right? The code is right there. And this is because of the way the internet works, right? We're not visiting Amazon.com. Amazon said, oh, you want to see my homepage? Here, I'm going to send you all the code for it. So now it lives in my browser, and the browser runs it, right? So when we were running Python code, we were having a Python interpreter run it. We were saying Python and then the file name, and the interpreter ran the code. Here, the browser is running the code. Cool? So this is all the HTML that makes up the web page. We can also see, and we'll revisit this, all the CSS that's been applied is over here. And then I think that's all I want to go over, just these two for right now. Okay, so we'll come back to these in a second. So cool, this is all great. Let's talk about how do we write this front-end code, right? So that we can deliver it to our client and they can see the web page that we want them to see. So we'll come back to this in a second. I'm going to make a new folder. And oh, not there though. RM, it's rm-rf, right? Oh, but I'm in the folder, so I can't do that. Ugh. Okay. What's up?
I thought make DIR made in this folder.
It does.
You ran
Oh, mkcd makes a folder and CDs me into it.
Okay.
But I think it's something I have in my bash. I can't remember. I'll post it in Slack if you want it. It's pretty cool. Okay, so we're in our HTML folder. So when we write HTML, we need an HTML file. So I'm going to make an HTML file. I'm going to call it index.html. It's going to appear up here. Let me blow this up a little bit. And this over. Oops. Cool. So let's write some HTML and then run it in the browser. So the first thing that we're going to do, I think it's required by law to write hello world first. So let's just do that. Hello world, just so we're good. Okay. So this is our first HTML tag, right? There's a bunch of tags we'll see as we go over. And really what HTML is it's a way of wrapping content and giving it meaning, right? So HTML kind of builds the structure, the bones of our website. CSS is how we apply styles. That's how we make it look a certain way. We can actually add some interaction with that. And then JavaScript is all the interaction, right? So any programmatic thing that needs to happen, if you see like a slideshow, that's all JavaScript, right? That's like causing like if you click on something and a cartoon pops up, all that stuff, right? So yeah, one way I like to think about it is like if you're building a house, HTML is like the guts of it. So like why can't I think of it now? The frame, the foundation, the frame of the walls, that type of stuff. CSS is how do I paint it? Like what wallpaper do I put up? You know what I mean? And then JavaScript is the light switch. It goes on and off, right? Turns my lights on and off. I turn the faucet and the water comes out. It's all that interactive stuff, right? So HTML is just the bones. And so it's not really a fully fledged programming language. It's more of it's a markup language. It actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And markup language is just how do I give meaning and structure to my content, right? So so H1 is a heading tag, and we do this with tags. So H1 is a heading tag, and there's 6 of them. There's H1 through H6, and we're just going to look at this H1 right now. So let's see what happens if I run this code. So I have a, where is it? Open in default browser, that's what I want. Cool, and then it opened over here, so let me grab it. No. Look at that. Impressed? Yeah, all right, okay. You have a question?
Yeah, I thought we needed to include the doc type.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that. Yeah, so how did I run that? So you can see up in my browser here is actually, I can provide it the path to that file on my system, and it will run. But I have and I'll post this in Slack too, please remind me. There's a plugin where you can just right-click on a file and click open in default browser, and it'll automatically open it in your browser for you. That's what I did. Yeah. And that's the easiest way to do it. So, you can drag it into Chrome. Yeah, and you know what you might...
You could double-click the file to just .html it, and you just double-click it.
So there's a bunch of different ways to run it. Yeah. Bunch of different ways.
When you update it?
When I update it, it will not update. I'll have to do it again.
When you update it, all you have to do is quick refresh.
Or refresh the page, because it already has the path right here. Okay. Sorry. No, go ahead. Add one more. Why not? Pile it on.
Plugin called Live Server, which automatically refreshes every time.
Oh, yeah. So we're not going to talk about, there's one called HTTP server. It's a node package. That's a good one too. Yeah. So running it with a server is better, but we'll get to that later. We won't do it that right now. What I really want to point out actually is, and you're totally right about the server, is this is just a file of code that the browser knows how to read, right? So it doesn't have to come to us over the internet. It just happens to always come to us over the internet, right? But regardless, when the browser sees .html, it goes, okay, I know what to do with that, right? So let's actually take a look here and inspect, just like we did before. So this is the HTML that makes up our page. Now we see that there's some tags here that we didn't write, and we'll talk about those in a second. But what I really want to point out is here's the H1, right? So here's the tag that we wrote, and it showed up right there. We can write a couple more tags. So I said that there was, let's do, there's H2. Come on, man. This one I'm just going to do faster. H3, so it goes through 6. Don't worry about memorizing all of these right now. I just want you to see a couple of things. So I'm going to refresh, and you see now I have all 3, and they're all different sizes, right? So I want to point out that like this doesn't have to be that way, and I want you to really like not start thinking about HTML as a way to style your website. So if you're thinking like, oh, I want something to be huge on the page, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an H1, right? H1 means heading 1, like it should be the main header on my page. H2 is like, oh, I have some subheadings and stuff like that. So you really want to think about like, what does it mean? You can make it look any way you want once we get to CSS. Once I get to CSS, I can make this invisible, and I can make this as big as the entire page, right? So that doesn't matter. However, since there is no CSS, the browser is smart, and it tries to interpret, and it assumes, okay, well, your heading should probably be bigger, so it adds its own styles, but we can overwrite them very easily. Cool? Okay, so Narayan mentioned like why you were talking about the head tag and all that stuff. So you can see that the browser actually filled some stuff in. It put this empty head tag here, this HTML tag, and that's because it's smart and it just wants to run your page for you. So if I give it HTML, it's going to do its best to run it for me. But we want to write like correct HTML, semantically correct. We want to be able to like do it correctly. So instead of just flat out writing HTML like this, I'm going to copy this. Just, oh my God, stop it. Copy this here and we'll walk over. This is a properly formatted HTML page, okay? So let's walk through it real quick. First, there's something called the doc type. This just sits at the top. You just have to put it there, the end. It just declares that this is an HTML file, right? Just needs to be there. It seems redundant when you get to the next tag, which is the HTML tag. It wraps everything, right? So far, these two are just things that need to be there. We don't really even need to worry about what they're doing. They just have to be there. Cool. The next thing is important, and it's the head tag. The head tag is where we put everything that doesn't show up on the page, but the page needs to run, right? So nothing that's in the head tag is going to actually show up on the page, but this is where I can put metadata about the page. Stuff for like search engine optimization goes in here. In a minute, we're going to link to other pages, or link to style sheets, link to JavaScript can go here, although we won't put it there. It's stuff like that goes in the head, right? Also, this title tag right here, which will dictate what shows up here. We can actually refresh that and see that real quick. See, now it says Code Platoon up here, and the tag, that's our title. Cool? So that's the head tag. We'll mess with it a little bit more here. The things that are here are just kind of here by default. We don't necessarily need these, but again, these are things for like screen readers. They're helpful for search engine, all this other stuff, right? So we don't need these meta tags, but they're nice to have. We'll just keep them. Cool. That's the head. So we have a head, and then we have a body. The body is everything that shows up on the actual page, right? So that is what we see. So in our body, we have the H1, and that's our hello world that showed up here. Now you also notice that we have tags. You can see this nested nature of HTML, right? Tags are inside of tags are inside of other tags. And that's going to be really important. One, about like how we format the content. And then two, it's going to come into play when we start actually trying to move this stuff around and have it laid out the way we want, right? So there's this nested nature of things can be, and this can go on infinitely, nesting things inside of each other. Also, you probably noticed that each tag has an opening and closing tag. And the opening tag is the carets with the name of the tag, and the closing tag has the backslash in it. Looks like I actually did that one wrong. So it should be like that. It has the backslash. Cool?
One quick question.
Yeah.
So I see like a pattern where you have like head and then like an opening of head and end of head.
Yep.
Opening title, end of title. How come the meta is?
That's a great question. Yeah. So, and not to add further confusion to it, but some tags are self-closing tags and some are opening tags. So the reason the meta tags don't is because the meta tags don't really have to wrap any data. They just contain a bunch of, we'll get to these in a second, attributes. So they don't need that. Another really popular one, if I'll just jump ahead, is like an image tag. And with an image tag, we don't wrap an image in it. We just tell the image tag where the image is. So we do source equals, and then I would say like either my image is at like ./image.jpg, like that. And so I would have this image would be in my directory right here, and it would just know where to go get it. Just like importing, right? Just like when we import other files. So image tag is a self-closing tag. But most tags that wrap data will have opening and closing, right? And again, don't bother memorizing these. Just when you know you need to do something, this is easy to look up and it'll click, right? You know what I mean? Cool. Okay, so I think that was that. Okay, so let's talk about these attributes real quick. So, so we have these tags. We're going to stick with our H1 for right now. Actually, let's add one more. Really common one is a paragraph tag. This is a bunch of text. Cool. We'll come back over here. We'll refresh. And you can see there's our paragraph tag, right? And notice that it appears right one on top of the other, right? We'll talk about this in a minute, but these tags are one on top of the other. If I do, let's do one more. Oops. That one will appear right below, right? So we'll just keep going like that. Okay, let's talk about these attributes. So tags have opening and closing. They can also have attributes. And there are a bunch of attributes that we can attach to tags. But and they can do a bunch of different things. They can dictate kind of how it behaves. They can add extra metadata. And they can add extra meaning to the tags. And that's what I really want to hit right now. That's important. Is how we can add extra meaning to these tags or to these HTML elements with these things called attributes. There's two really common ones that you'll use a ton. One is called ID, and the other is called class. IDs are unique. You should only have one ID on each page, one of that ID on each page, right? So I would not want anything else on my page to have the ID of main heading. Only one, right? And that gives more meaning to this heading. Now I know not only is this heading a heading, it is the main heading, right? Classes group stuff together. So I could also give this H2 class heading. And now these are both this H2 and this H1 are part of this class, which is just a group. Don't confuse it with a class in Python. Right now, it's just a group. They belong to this special group. Cool. This will make more sense when we get to CSS. Okay, so those are attributes. There's a bunch of other ones, but the most important ones are ID and class for us right now. Cool. We'll go over a few common tags. Yeah, I'm going over what's in the curriculum right now. I'm not going to go over all. I listed like a bunch of these. I would encourage you to go back and look at them. There's actually over 100 tags, right, that you can use. So it's really about trying to think about what do I want, what does my content mean, and how do I go find the tag that kind of is going to wrap that data in a meaningful way. But we'll go over a couple that are really, really common. So one was that image tag, which I showed you, which looks like this. This can take a path relative to where your HTML file is. It could also take like a URL. So if I was hosting a file online, I could just give it the URL of that file online, and it would go grab that image and make it appear here. Another really, really common one that we're going to start using a lot more of later today is a div. Does anybody know what a div tag is? So, what'd you say? Kind of. It's because it's like dividing. I don't really actually know what it stands for. But what did you say?
I say container.
Yeah, it's like it helps us. So you're right in that it helps us separate the page into different, divide it into sections. But really, just think about it as like it's a generic container, right? And what we usually do is like we'll take the div, and we'll do like div here, cut this here. We usually use it to wrap a bunch of stuff. And let's say this was like, let's try to give some of this meaning. Article. Let's say these two things go together. This H1 and this this paragraph. So like this is the heading for my article and this is the paragraph. I might want to wrap these in a div. Actually, let's call this article heading. And then I would call this article. Does that make sense? So we're wrapping that content and saying like this all belongs together, it's related, right? So this is my heading for my article, this is my body for my article. Both of them together make up the whole article, right? So divs are important. We'll use them all the time. Let's see, links. If I want to link to another page, that's called a anchor tag. Yep. Let's actually look at this anchor tag. So anchor tags require, some of these require these attributes. So an anchor tag needs to know where am I linking to. And that's this href right here. Href equals, we'll just make a link to google.com. And actually, if we go over here, we can see the link. And if we click it, it'll take us wherever we tell it to take us, right? So that's the anchor tag. We did paragraph. Yes, please. Please. This is, yeah.
Is there any reason why this href and source and all these other?
I have no idea.
Why isn't just one?
I don't know. I really don't know what href stands for.
Doesn't source bring something to you? Like you have an SRC tag, it's bringing the image.
Oh
to
yeah,
that
that's
page.
probably it.
And then href is taking you to that place.
Yeah.
Hypertext reference or something.
Right, yeah, it's probably something reference, maybe hypertext. And I think that explanation makes sense to me. Like source, I'm saying give me something. The href, I'm saying like take me somewhere. So
But I thought so you can't go somewhere.
what?
You guys said earlier that you can't go to a website. It
What?
goes to you.
Oh well, yeah. So that is a really, really good point. Yes, it's saying go get me.
Go give me new.
No, Holly, you got me so bad now. I can't take myself out of this.
Pick me.
No, you're so right. You're so right. You're so right.
Just reloading the page with the new information.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe start from scratch. Like get me new stuff from scratch. I don't know. Anyway, this is a link. That was good looking out. Good looking out, Holly. You got to hold me accountable to the crap that comes out of my mouth. Okay, last one I'm going to show you real quick because we're not going to play with it as much today, but we will in the coming days. Is a form. So this, I know this is a lot just to look at right here, but pay attention to 19 and 32. This is a form tag. So you've heard John say this, you'll hear me say this over and over again. The internet is all forms, just a bunch of forms, right? And so like if we render this over here, you can see it's not styled, it looks terrible, but this is a form and it doesn't even have a submit button. I forgot to put a submit button on it. But it has, forms are made up of label tags and input tags. And the input is anywhere I can type text, and the label like attaches to the input, gives it meaning. What the hell's going on over there? Sounds like Darth Vader. All right. Yeah.
Actually, this is, but I'm sorry, it's stuck in my head now what you said about going to.
Sure.
But is it maybe like, so So source would say to like, okay, I want this on my page, and like store it, and like this is on my
Yep.
page now. But like the link would say, okay, each time I want you to grab this each time that you
Yes.
open this page or run through this page, like or click on this thing.
No, that's a great way to say it.
So it's not stored on that page. That could change whatever you're grabbing.
Yeah.
But
So
if it's a source, it won't change unless you
No.
purposely go to change it. Even if it changes from what it was, but if they change it somehow, so you have to purposely go.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. That's a good way to think. That's a great way to think about it.
Sorry. I just
No,
wanted to make
no,
sure.
I'm glad. I want people to be clear. Okay, so here's our form. I need to do. Let's give it a submit button because this is insane. Input type, submit. I don't think I need these. Come back over here. Okay, here's my submit button. So you notice when I click it, look, pay attention to what happens up here in the URL. So I'm gonna click it. It goes to my handling form page, which is what we set up here in this action attribute, right? So what we essentially can do is say, once the action is saying, when I submit this form, this is where I want you to send all the data, right? And we'll play with this much more specifically as we go. But that's all you really need to know about forms. And forms do a lot for you, right? Because data needs to be, just like our HTTP requests needed to be formatted a certain way, when we include data in one of our requests, it needs to be formatted a certain way. And forms will do that for you, right? It will format all that data for you so that it gets sent to the server in a way that they can parse. So forms are powerful. They're annoying. They're powerful. You'll use them a lot. Okay, and the main things you need to know is there's this main form tag, and then there's input tags, and there's a bunch of different kinds of input tags. These are all type text, type email, type submit. You've probably seen like those drop-down menus. That's just a different type of input, and you can look all those up. Cool.
Is that method post? Is that relevant?
Yeah, so that's actually great. Remember when I said that we had the method get? It was like get, when I was drawing it out, it was like get, and that was just like retrieve information for me. The other big method we'll be working with is post, and that means I'm sending you info. You're gonna have to save something in the database. You're gonna have to do something on the database. And so when we send the form, if we set method to post, it'll bundle all that that helps it make the HTTP request the right way.
I have a question.
Yep.
When you do forms, you always have to have an action and a method. I'm just imagining.
For now, yes. For now, yes. We'll make this even more complicated in a few weeks, but for right now, yes, you need those. Cool. Okay, so so that's just like a really quick and dirty intro to HTML. Are there any questions before I move on to CSS?
Really quick.
Yeah, please.
Let's go back to we have a div. We always have to have an ID.
No, you don't always need these attributes, and that's something that gets confusing. Some A tag needs the href, right? Or it has nowhere to go. ID and class are all optional, but most of the time you're going to put them on there, and you'll see why in a second. But it's not required. It's not required. Okay. So we've laid out the structure for our website. Looks amazing. I don't know what it does, but it's here, and we want to add some styles to it, right? We want to make it look better. Actually, I think we're going to ditch this and start from scratch. Is that what I did? Yes, I did. Good. Okay. Okay, so let's forget about all these for now. Just some common stuff that we went over. And we're going to start back with our hello world. And so right now I have hello world. Let's refresh. It's just black and that size. What's up?
I mentioned this earlier. How do you quickly get the skeleton for the HTML?
Yeah, so this time I actually copy and pasted it, but there is a shortcut. It's bang tab. Yeah, there's a bunch of different shortcuts to do it.
I see that your closing tags are auto-populated too. Is that an extension or vehicle?
That I think is, let me see. This is way off. Why are you making me do this? I don't remember. I'll look it up.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's there now. Okay. Get back to where I have hello world. Okay. Let's delete that. Because I'm going to rewrite it. I want to rewrite it together. I forgot I already put it in there. Okay. So now we want to add styles. I want to be able to style my H1. We'll just focus on one tag at a time right now, okay? So you can write CSS in your HTML file. You can actually apply CSS directly to an element with a style attribute here. We usually do not do that, so I'm not going to do that. What we usually do is we write all our CSS in a separate file. And so the way we do that is we make a CSS file, touch, we'll call it styles.css. We'll keep it right in the same directory. And then we need to link it to the HTML file. Basically, we need to import it, right? Just like when we were doing with Python. And the way we do that is in the head. All of my links to style sheets should go in the head of my HTML. So I'm going to do link. And then, damn it, is this source or it's href? I don't know why it's href. It just is. / styles.css. And then I think I also want to put type.
What is CSS?
Cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets. And this link is one of those self-closing tags, right? So I don't need another tag. And now we'll see if this actually works. So let's open our CSS. Let's try to get these side by side. All right, so CSS, the basic like workflow with it is I target an element. Basically, I tell it this is the element, and then I provide it a list of, pretty sure they're called rules, I always forget, that I want basically that element to follow when it displays itself, right? And I just put those in brackets. So the simplest way to do this is to say, hey, what this will do is grab any H1, all the H1s on the page. So we actually really want to do this, but we'll start like this. All the H1s on the page, we just have one. And I want to make the color red. Now this will be when we do color, that's text, the color of the text, right? So I'm going to say color red. You can see I just wrote red and it knew. There are some keyword colors that it will work, but you can also provide this the RGB values of a color if you really want a specific color, right? And that's normally what you would do. You wouldn't want these primary colors, but primary colors are just in there by default, so we'll use them. Okay, so now if I go visit my page, if this worked, nothing happens because it didn't work. Let's see, what did we do wrong? It's probably we import this incorrectly. What's up? Oh, that could be part of it. Oh, what did that do? I still think we're importing it incorrectly. I might have to do, I think I have to tell it it's a style sheet, and I believe it's this. I don't know, this is how I have it in the example, which I'm assuming I had working at some point. Here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I had not provided the link enough information, apparently, for it to know what the hell to do with this file. So I had this, I don't even know what this is, but I had to put this here. Sorry, I wish I knew this. I just don't know this part. Okay. Anyway, we've linked it, right? That's the, again, don't try to memorize all these nuts and bolts that I'm doing right now. It'll blow your brain up. Just what's the concept that happened? I had to link the style sheet. That's easily Googleable, right? How do I link this style sheet? Why won't this style sheet link? You'll be fine. Okay, cool. So we've made this the color red, which is great. Really quick, I want to refactor though. Normally, sometimes we'll set like global styles. Now imagine a web page with dozens of H1s all over the place, right? Not just on one page, but on other pages too, right? We might want to target those differently. We can run into a lot of problems if we target stuff based on the tag name. So usually what you'll do is you'll have some base styles, like for H1, and you'll say like, I want all my H1s to be this font, but then everything else you'll target either by ID or class. And most often you'll see it targeted by class, but I'll show you both. So let's make one other H1 here so we can kind of see this in action. So if I go over here and I refresh, now right now I'm targeting all the H1s and I'm making them red, right? Let's go down here and let's give each of these a ID. We'll say ID. We'll just call this hello, and we'll give this one ID. Cool. So now if I want to target just the hello world, I'm going to do hash means I want to target an ID, and then I just pass it the ID. Hello, same thing. And let's do like font size, and we'll say like 100 pixels. So when we do sizes of things, there are a bunch of different measurements we can use, right? And this again is a deep, deep dive into being really good at CSS. Right now we're going to use pixels, just because I think like learning wise it's the easiest to understand. It's this many pixels by this many pixels, right? Or this many pixels high. The more you do this, you'll probably use percents, and then also something called ems. And these are things that size your elements relative to the size of your viewport. You know, you get a responsive website, and when you shrink it, everything shrinks, right? That's the more modern way to do it. But for our learning purposes, we'll stick with pixels. I think they're the easiest. So we're going to say, I want hello to be 100 pixels. Come over here. And so now that's enormous. So now what we're doing here is we're targeting all the H1s and making them red, but then I was able to target a specific element and change its font size. Does that make sense? So we're starting to see how this works? Cool.
So if you change the size of your screen right now in the browser, you're saying that it'll remain the same?
Yeah, exactly. It won't scale. So like, it'll try to like fit it all there, but it keeps it, it won't change the font size, right? Cool. What else did I want to do?
You don't need the semicolon. Not really.
I do need the semicolon. If I wanted to put something below this, I would need it. Yeah. Okay. What are we at? Okay.
They're industry standard, so I see like you have named CSS styles, and then is that like just like industry standard?
Here?
No, this actual file styles of CSS. Is that standard? Like have that as your main CSS?
No, not necessarily. No. I mean, like, there's a bunch.
Normally you have like an extensive.
Yeah, you're so yeah. I think like if we were back in like the 90s and like this is how because this is not really how we're gonna end up writing all of our web pages, right? But if we were, probably, yeah. But when we get to React, we'll be doing it a different way. So yeah. Okay, what is the next thing here? I think that's it as far as like targeting stuff. This can get a lot more complicated. We can also, you can string these together. What's up?
The class, the dot.
Oh yeah, you want to do the class real quick? That's a good idea. So let's actually make give both of these the same class. We'll do this and then we'll move on to the next thing. And we'll just call it heading. I know this seems redundant because we can target them by H1, but actually, like, let's say we also had like an H3. Okay, so now we have two H1s. We're targeting those and making them red. We have one thing with an ID of hello. We're targeting that and increasing its font size. Now we also have three things that all have the class heading, right? And they're all different tags. Two of them are H1s, one's an H3. And we want to apply a style to all of those. If I want to target a class, I just do dot and then the name of the class. And I'm trying to think of what to do this. Let's give everything a border. Nope. Border, just border. And we can do solid green. So this will be hideous, but we'll come back here. Yeah, it is. I didn't even realize that. Okay, and now we got borders. Cool. Yeah, real gross, but these are the basics. So there are, as you can imagine, like tons of rules that we can do, right, and put in there. And they all basically break down to two things. One is styles, and the other is layout. And then we're going to talk about layout in a second. So styles is what we've been doing. How does it look? Layout is where the hell is everything, right? And that's what we'll do next.
The class. You have to do
Dot
hashtag
is ID.
ID.
Dot is class. Yeah.
You're just doing it by, I forgot each one.
It's just
It's actually.
it's the tag.
Oh,
The tag. These green things are the
oh, it's
attributes.
green.
Yep. No, you're good. You're good. This is a lot, and I also know this is not the most interesting stuff. So, but we just need to know it.
The way I try to remember it, I know it's a little confusing me on what I'm about to say, but like classes, like when I think about programming language, they have methods that use dot and use. That's how I usually remember. I'm like, oh yeah, the class is, it dot in the CSS, like, play with the class, CSS.
Whatever works.
Me. Yeah.
Whatever works. Okay. Let's see where we at. Positioning elements. This is the last part. Okay, so styles, you can do a ton of different stuff with the styles. We established that. Now we want to talk about layout. I'm going to draw for just a second, so bear with me with this drawing. Switch this. Okay. So when we talk about CSS, when we talk about HTML, we can organize our tags into like two kind of categories, right? One is called block level. The other is called inline. And these are ways that they interact with each other on the page, right? So an HTML page, just in its raw form, it stacks things on top of each other, right? Or within each other. So we actually saw with what we have going on right now, we can see that these things are stacked on top of each other, right? Hello world is stacked on top, and then cool is here, and then whatever is down here, right? And they just stack on top of each other. Now, I might, and then we can see these spaces and stuff. So a lot of what the layout is going on with the layout right now, we were targeting the styles. What's going on with the layout, the browser is just kind of trying to figure it out for us because we haven't explicitly told it to do it, right? So let's just these are all block level elements. And let's talk about what that means, right? It basically means that the element itself, so this is all in H1, the element will be as large as the content inside of it, and it will take up the entire width of the window by default, always. So it'll be a big, giant block, basically, right? It'll get as high as the content. We made this 100 pixels high. And then it'll always stretch to the end. You can see this one's smaller, but it still stretches all the way to the end, right? So these are block level elements. Block level elements have something called the box model. Has anybody ever heard of this? And so it's really annoying. And I'm actually hopefully going to get it. It's like this. So you can imagine this. This is kind of, sorry. Okay, so we have our content, and then it's padding, border, and then margin. Cool. So these are all things these are all things that exist on my element that I can manipulate, right? So content is what's in the middle. That's hello world, right? Surrounding the content is something called padding, right? So it doesn't break outside. It's like if I set the padding, let's actually do that real quick. Let's set the padding to our H1, to our hello. Padding, let's do like, make it dramatic, 20 pixels. So do you see that more space now exists around it? That's like, so the border is outside. It's like, it's so hard to explain. Like, we just created space basically between the content and the border, right? So we squish it basically, right? Yeah, it basically created more white space between the border, right? So it's like, sometimes I think about it, like if this was a box and we were shipping Hello World, like the packing peanuts around what we're shipping, right? And the more we put in there, it's squishing our content, right? So this is the packing peanuts around it. The border is the box itself. The border actually goes around the whole box. And then the margin is how much space do I want in between elements, right? So I don't want your package like rubbing up against my package. I want 10 pic. I don't know. All right, I get it. I want like 10 pixels of space between. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So all of this, again, you don't have to just understand that there's these different ways to position the content relative to each other, margin, and then also within its own like box model, right? Cool. Okay. That's the box model. We have one more thing to go over. Who needs a break? Or should we just power through? Power through. Power through. Okay. Almost done. These are our box level elements. Let's look at some inline ones real quick. So span is one. So now if I take these, and even if I stack, whoops, stack them all on top of each other, if we come over here and I render this, you can see they all line up, right? So these do not behave the same way. That's why they're called inline, right? I can keep, they will stay in line with wherever I put them. Cool. Most things operate on the block level, but you will see stuff that is inline as well. And that's going to be really important because you're not going to have the same attributes, or it's the same things you can target with the inline stuff. Okay, so that's that. So the last thing that we're going to need to talk about is CSS Grid. So this is actually, we're actually very lucky to be in this time because positioning stuff in CSS used to be extremely tedious, time consuming, and confusing as hell as far as like a getting started, right, and learning it. Used to have to position things relative to other things, and it was really hard. Then something called Flexbox came around, and it allowed you to separate, to like immediately separate your page into columns that you could work with much more easily. So you could say like, I want this H1 to only live in this column, and it would just put it there, right? Now we have CSS Grid, which is this same thing. It also adds rows. So now, really all we need to do is define this grid. We need to tell our page, this is how I want the grid to look. And it doesn't have to be even like this. It can be, we can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. We'll just stick with even like this. And then I can say, put my H1 here, put cool over here. And then like even whatever's all the way at the bottom, I can put it all the way up front and just say, put whatever new, right? And I just get to place things in the grid. So much easier. Still annoying. Laying out stuff is just always annoying. So much easier. So I'm going to show you how to set this up real quick, and then I will release you. Okay, so let's get a new HTML page. This is linking to that same style sheet. I'm going to kill all this. All right, let's look at what we have right now. Right now, we have applied no styles, and we just have, what are these? We just have divs, right? Which are just like these generic containers. And each one just has a number label for it. So we have, this is the actual content is what's inside here. So it's the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or the words. And then they each have an ID, which is specific, right? And then they all belong to class grid child, right? And then they are all inside of another div that we're calling wrapper. Cool, so we're wrapping all this content. So all of this stuff lives inside here. Once again, if we go to inspect, we can kind of see the nested nature of what we have here. Here's our wrapper. Here's all the elements inside of it, okay? So the way we tell this page, hey, I want you to start using CSS Grid, and I want to be able to place things with the grid, is first I need to tell it which element I want to turn into a grid, basically. And that's why we have this wrapper, right? You're going to see that a lot, throwing a wrapper around stuff so that you can then manipulate everything inside. So we'll just do ID wrapper, and then we say display grid, And that says now everything inside of wrapper will be displayed as a grid. And now I need to tell it, how do I want you to define the rows and columns, right? What do I want that to look like? And so I do that by saying grid template, whoops, what am I doing first? Columns. And now I can just do go over what that is in a second. I'm going to say grid gap is 10 pixels. And I'm going to say grid template rows. Let's do 80 pixels. So what have I said here? I've said I want everything in wrapper to be displayed as a grid. For the columns, I want you to make 3 columns. So if I passed 6 arguments here, then I would have 6 columns, right? 1 argument, 1 column. Yeah, so what is FR, right? We haven't talked about that yet. FR is a new measurement that we have that's really useful. And I think it stands for fraction. Basically, the browser will just calculate, even as we open it, like, or expand it and contrast it, will keep recalculating, and it will split the grid up into 3 equal fractions, right? So what I'm saying here is column 1 is 1 fraction of the page, column 2 is another fraction of the page, column 3 is another fraction of the page. So evenly split them up, right? And you don't have to do evenly. You could do this if you wanted more space in the middle, but we'll keep them even. Then I'm saying in between each grid, so like when I had those rows and columns, I just want a gap in between. That's all that's defining. And then grid template rows is exactly what you think. We're going to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows that are 80 pixels high. Cool. So when we do this, yeah.
Can you use FR?
Yes, yeah, you can. You can use it anywhere. You can even use it for font size, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just trying to do a variety here, but for sure. So if we redo this, now you can see a couple things happen, right? All these, so because we didn't tell CSS where to place everything, it just tried to assume, did the best it could, right? And it basically threw everything in a section. If I go to the element now, this is a really helpful part of the dev tools. So if I highlight the wrapper is our grid, right? That's really important to know. Everything else is just inside the grid, but the wrapper is the grid. So if I highlight the wrapper, let's see if I can put this down here. If I highlight the wrapper, I can see my grid that I've defined, right? I have 3 columns, I have 8 rows, and then I have this gap in between. I can't, unfortunately, but you can see that gap. We can make that gap 20 pixels, and it'll, oops, first needs to refresh. And now we have these bigger gaps, right? Cool. So now from here, I have a grid. I just need to tell each thing where to go. So let's do, how did I do this?
You can just do columns, or you can just do rows.
Yep.
Or you can do no gap.
Yep, you can do it without a gap. You can, it's very flexible.
You don't have to have.
No, and I'll show you a link. There is a site called CSS Tricks, and it's this guy who just decided I will be the CSS guru on the internet, and it worked. And now, but his site is great. It has tons of information about CSS and stuff like that. So if you want to get really good at this, it's a commitment, but that's a great resource. Okay, we're gonna do one thing here. We're gonna target. So remember, I have grid child as a class. We're going to target that, and I'm just going to make some changes so this stuff is easier to see. So we're going to give it a background color, we're going to give it a border, and we'll give it some padding. And so now we can kind of see these whole divs. So everything that's green is the div, right? Even though the content's tiny, I told it to be much bigger, right? And we can see them still filling up that entire thing. So now I can, I'm not limited to those grid cells. I can stretch across them if I want. I can do a bunch of different things. So let's say, let's target 1. Oops. And how do I tell this where I want it to go, right? So I'm going to say that I want it to start here. And let's say I want it to stretch all the way to the end. So I want the first one to just go across all the rows, right? Or all the columns, my bad. So we can say grid column. And what I provide this looks like a fraction, but really it's a start and stop. So I'm going to say 1/4. And then let's say grid dash row.
Put GIRD.
Yep, thank you. Grid. 1/3. Let's see what this did. So you can see that now it takes up from the first column all the way to the end. And I know we have 3 columns, but these numbers are actually the edges. So this is 1, this edge is 2, this edge is 3, and this edge is 4. Does that make sense? So I'm saying you got to start at edge 1, and there's always going to be 1 more, right? 4. So stretch it all the way to the end. So we told it to stretch the entire width of all the columns. And then we also told it the same thing here. We said start at row 1 and go to row 3. And that's exactly what it did. We started row 1, 1, 2, 3, right? It's really these borders that we're actually telling it to switch. So now I've filled this whole thing up. And that's basically it. If I want to tell an element where to go, I just said it's grid row and it's grid column, and it'll just go there. I'm not going to type all of these other ones out, but I'll paste them real quick, and we can just see. I think I have this, so some of them are overlapping. And you really have a lot of freedom with how you do it. So I have these all targeted in different ways. And if we refresh, you can see we can have some of them overlap. They'll go exactly where we want, and we can deal with them any way we want. Cool. And this is all in the curriculum, so if you want to see exactly how these are laid out. But all I did was apply grid row and grid column to these, and that's it. I think that is finally it. Cool. Any questions? CSS, HTML, HTTP. Cool. Let's go over your challenges for today.